Can I can
disrupting
I
them.
can I segue
Yeah.
into my Moscow minute? And
Yes.
I'm just going to keep it at 1 minute. But I think, and I said this before, I think this is why we need to keep a global perspective in mind. That we need to work in national politics. We need to work through parties. We need to work outside of parties. We need to do work in populist movements. But I think we need to look. The whole Black Lives Matter thing was an international phenomenon, and I think the issues now are international. I mean, the pandemic, um, climate change. These are all international issues, and the economy are international issues. And the rest of the world is also waking up to the U.S. As being the hypocrite, U.S. government being the hypocrite that it is. And I think we need a global approach, and not communist international, which was the Russian approach. But we need some kind of international approach, and I don't know what it's going to be. I don't know if it's going to be kind of like uh, I mean, I don't think revolution is inevitable, but I think change is inevitable. So I differ from the classic Marxist theory in that approach. But I think there has to be we have to keep a global perspective in mind, and we need to work with our our global partners in around the world, and as well as working within this country. That's it.
I mean, you did say that you're not into sovereignty, right?
Well, I mean, sovereignty is a reality that we have right now, but obviously sovereignty is, I mean, it means more for some countries than others. Uh, I mean, you look at like new countries like South Sudan or East Timor, um, or you look at Iraq, right? I mean, there was this, L. Paul Bremer, was appointed the whatever to manage that country when they were doing nation building under Bush after the Iraq War, and it was based on this naive assumption that somehow Iraqis were going to unite around the idea of national sovereignty. Whereas these were just like in the Middle East, those borders were drawn up in the Sykes-Picot Agreement in World War One, after World War One, and they were just done on the back of a napkin. Basically, they did not consult with the people there at all, and so as a result, these basically different alliances and different tribes and different languages and cultures were just arbitrarily separated into by a line, those international borders. So in that sense, I mean, the sovereignty is almost kind of like doesn't really mean too much. And the United States has a strong sense of a mission. The Declaration of Independence, bringing that back to today, the breaking away from Britain and creating this model of freedom that was kind of a new thing. So I think we have a strong sense of sovereignty, and it's not bad to have a sense of pride in your history and a pride in how you got to be where you are and your aspirations as a people, as a nation. But the idea of a sovereign country being U.S. being represented by military, by nuclear weapons, by the threat of using of mass violence against other countries, is that really the kind of sovereignty that we want? Or trying to manipulate the economy so we can milk the resources and wealth of other people around the world for our benefit? Because who are we? We're a melting pot of a nation. We're not just one people. So it's kind of like hypocritical. You're talking about making our country better at the expense of everyone else. I think we have to move beyond that. So whether it's actual abandonment of sovereignty ultimately, and I'm not one of these world government people, but we have to look beyond just pursuing national interests at the expense of the planet. Okay.
Well, see, I think that's where so I do understand that technically like statehood and borders, all that, it is all arbitrary, right? And I do believe that we are all one people, essentially. But I think where the danger comes in is that you cannot, there is absolutely no way of having every single person represented in any sort of these decisions that end up ultimately being made on behalf of countries, right? So when you think about how we work in NATO and even the UN, all these things, so we have these certain countries that have more power than other countries, and just because they're bigger or because their GDP or their military might, whatever it may be, that that they end up making decisions for these other countries that maybe these decisions, they don't work for the people that actually have to live under these mandates. And so I think that is where it's a very like unclear, opaque line, of like, where do you draw the line?
Right, but maybe you could do some things like reform the UN, or you can create some, transnational institutions that have more power and more equitable representation of different people around the world. So yeah, you're not going to have it so everyone has an equal vote. It's not going to be a perfect system, but right now it's so skewed that it's you really need to move in a direction of more democratic representation. However you do that, and it's not going to be perfect, but anything, even a small change in that direction would be huge. Because right now, we don't really, we have like, people like John Bolton who think that the U.S. should dictate to the rest of the country, rest of the world, how they should run their affairs, and that ultimately the U.S. Washington D.C. should run global policy, militarily and economically. And I just don't think the rest of the world wants to go along with that for the most part.
I agree with you. I'm just saying that you're talking about having, a global community coming up with things that, that will work for the globe.
Right.
And unfortunately, there is always going to be some sort of disparity. And
Right.
who is it that gets, the bad luck of having to pay that price?
Right.
That's the only thing.
Well, it's a conflict between, again, it's freedom versus justice. So you have to have economic justice and you have to have freedom. So I mean, the point is, like, you have basic human rights. I mean, this whole
But the problem is that those things look different to everybody. That's the issue, is that we can't ever come together on what these things look like, because for every person they just have a different
well,
perspective.
how about the right to life? I mean, is that the right to live your life? Is that not a national, a transnational aspiration?
You're not getting an argument from me. What I'm saying is that, okay, so like then you have the abortion argument
Yeah.
of right to life.
Right. Well,
When does life begin? You see what I'm saying? Like,
unfortunate choice
there's
of words, but I'm
always
just
there's
saying, like,
always that arbitrary line of where do you go? It's
right,
like a
but like,
seesaw.
bombing, killing civilians through. I mean, obviously that's a war crime. It's already, it's against the Geneva Convention, right? But like, it's not. It Nobody's held.
But
Um,
they're seen as collateral damage, right? I'm not saying that that's what I'm thinking.
from
I'm saying
from
that
from
unfortunately that's how it's seen, as that it's collateral damage because the United States needs to be safe. It's for our safety that we go and we
Right,
murder people
but it's not
overseas.
done through any kind of due process. Like George Bush said before, in the buildup to the Iraq War, the UN can choose to be relevant or not. So basically, the message was, we're going to do whatever we want to do, and if you want to support us, great. If not, we're going to still do it anyways.